we love getting into the really, really meaty stuff, and today we're going to do just that. We're going to kind of plunge right into like a pivotal moment right before this huge collision, and the piece you sent us, a podcast script, it focuses in on like a really, really specific part of the Bhagavad Gita. It's the second verse of the first chapter, and in this one verse, it's really interesting because on the surface it seems like it's just like a king making an observation, but it's so much more than that. It's like this pulsing thing with all this tension underneath. So our goal is to really, really like get under the skin of these lines, and see if we can like pull out some core insights about power dynamics and like psychological states of mind, and just like the very beginning of this epic conflict.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think what's so remarkable about this verse is just how much information and context is embedded in such a succinct statement. It's not simply a description of armies arrayed for battle.
Yeah.
It's a glimpse into a crucial turning point, both strategically and psychologically. I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
Okay, so let's set the scene here for everybody.
Hmm.
Right. We're talking about the Kurukshetra battlefield. Two massive forces, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. They're locked in this super tense standoff. You can just imagine the energy there, right? Years and years and years of this escalating conflict have finally led to this breaking point. And our window into this initial scene is through Sanjaya. He's this guy with this crazy ability. It was granted to him by the sage Vyasa and allows him to witness everything that's unfolding on the battlefield. And not only that, he can see it all from afar and report it back to the blind king Dhritarashtra, who's all the way back in Hasanapura.
Exactly. Sanjaya becomes kind of like our eyes and ears on the ground.
Yeah.
He offers us this crucial perspective as these like monumental events start to unfold. And the focus of this verse specifically, it's on Duryodhana. He's the Kaurava prince. And we're basically seeing the Pandava army through his eyes.
Right. Okay, so let's break down this verse piece by piece. I mean, this is kind of what we do here, right? We get this really rich information you bring to us and we dissect it. So this verse, it starts with Sanjaya Vacha. And even if Sanskrit's not your thing, it's pretty clear that this means Sanjaya said.
Right. So right away we know that everything we're about to hear, it's like a report. It's this secondhand account, and it's being relayed to the Dhritarashtra. And as listeners, we're kind of eavesdropping on that.
Yeah.
So Sanjaya, he's our entry point into this battlefield narrative.
Yeah, and that framing is so important, right? We're not getting a direct view of events. It's all being filtered through Sanjaya's narration. So we have to consider how that particular vantage point might color our understanding of what's happening. Right, totally. Okay, so the next part of the verse is the Vatu Bhagavani Pisha. And that means Duryodhana is seeing the Pandava army, and they're arranged in this military formation. Now, the key word here, and your script pointed this out, which is really cool. The key word is bicha. This word implies that it's a strategic deployment. It's organized.
Right.
This isn't just like a bunch of soldiers milling about. The Pandavas have clearly put a lot of thought and planning into their battle readiness.
Exactly. Bijihan suggests that they're a prepared and formidable adversary. And you can imagine what kind of psychological impact that would have had on Duryodhana just seeing this meticulously arranged army. It would have definitely been a bit unnerving. It basically underscores the fact that the Pandavas were ready for this. They weren't caught off guard, and they were presenting a very serious threat.
Definitely. And this organized appearance of the opposing force is the direct trigger for what Duryodhana does next. So the verse continues and it says, Akajam Upasongya, meaning he approaches his teacher. Now this teacher is Dronacharya, super respected warrior, and he was actually the guru to both the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And this is where things get super interesting, right? Because Duryodhana doesn't immediately go to his military commanders. He seeks out his teacher at this critical moment.
Yeah, that's a very revealing detail. Why Dronacharya? I mean, he was a figure of immense respect and a master strategist, but as we know from the broader epic, Drona had a lot of affection for some of the Pandava brothers, especially Arjuna. So this choice, this decision of who Duryodhana goes to first, it speaks volumes about what might be going on in his head.
Totally. And to wrap up the verse, it ends with Raja Vakanam Abravit, which means the king spoke these words. Now, the use of Raja, which means king here, it's super important too. It emphasizes Duryodhana's status, right? And it might even be like a subtle hint at the tone or the intention behind his approach to Dronacharya, like almost like reaffirming his authority in a situation that might be making him feel a bit uneasy.
Yeah, the fact that his royal title is reiterated at that exact moment, it does seem deliberate. It could be interpreted in a lot of different ways, right? It could be him asserting his power. It could be a way to give more weight to the words he's about to say.
Yeah.
Or it could even be like a subconscious attempt to kind of hold on to his sense of control in a situation that maybe feels increasingly uncertain.
Right, right. Okay, so let's dive into Duryodhana's potential mindset here. Why go straight to Dronacharya? And you raised some really great questions in the script you sent us. Was he just looking for some military advice? Was he looking for reassurance because he's seeing this incredibly well-organized Pandava army? Or, and this is where it gets really interesting, could there be like an underlying concern or even a little bit of suspicion? Because remember, Drona was known to have this affection for some of the Pandavas,
Yeah.
especially Arjuna.
These are the million-dollar questions, right? Because his action goes beyond just needing tactical guidance. If that was all he wanted, he would have probably gone straight to his military leaders, the people who are in charge of his forces. But the fact that he turns to Drona, who has this complicated position in the conflict because of his ties to both sides, it suggests a more complex set of motivations, right? It could be a mix of seeking advice, but also maybe subtly checking Drona's loyalty or even trying to influence him before the battle has even begun. Yeah. Yeah. And even the fact that he pauses to seek out his teacher before engaging at all, it's really significant, right? It doesn't paint the picture of this like wildly aggressive, impulsive king. There's this hesitation, this seeking out counsel, even if it's from someone with potentially divided loyalties.
Right. It definitely suggests this level of unease. Like maybe the first realization is dawning on him that the Pandavas are not going to be easy to defeat. So maybe this whole act of approaching Dronacharya is Duryodhana's way of grappling with just how serious the situation is and how vulnerable he might actually be.
And we can't forget about Sanjaya in all of this. You know, you pointed out his detached narration. It gives this really crucial perspective, both for King Dhritarashtra and for all of us listening, because he's not emotionally caught up in the battle. He's like this objective messenger, just giving the information. And that allows for this more contemplative understanding of what's happening.
Yes, and Jaz's role is super important. He's almost like a neutral observer, just presenting the facts without letting his emotions or biases get in the way. And this allows Dhritarashtra and us to analyze Duryodhana's actions and the whole situation with a little bit of distance. His narration really highlights Duryodhana's state of mind at this very tense moment before the fighting begins.
And this verse, as simple as it seems, it's loaded with symbolic weight. Like the script says, Duryodhana's reaction to seeing this strategically arranged Pandava army. You could interpret that as the first outward sign of what's going on inside him. Like it's probably a mix of his pride and his anxiety, and maybe even like a teeny tiny little bit of realization that, oh, wow, this is going to be a real challenge.
Totally. This is like the first act in this whole Kurukshetra war drama. And it's packed with symbolic meaning. Duryodhana approaching Drona, it's not just a tactical move. It represents his inner struggle, his reliance on authority figures, and maybe even his first encounter with the possibility that he might not actually win this thing.
So to kind of sum this up for everybody, if we pull out some key insights from this one little but very powerful verse, the first thing is, and the source material highlights this really well, even people with a lot of power, like King Duryodhana, they're not immune to feeling insecure when they come up against a strong and well-prepared opponent. Seeing that Pandava army all laid out strategically, it clearly had an effect on him.
And that's a crucial point. Power doesn't automatically equal confidence. What Duryodhana does here, it shows us that there's a human element to leadership and conflict. Even people who seem super strong on the outside, they can still have vulnerabilities, especially when they're facing a real challenge.
Absolutely. And the second takeaway is how people respond to those perceived threats. In Duryodhana's case, he goes and finds a mentor figure, even though that mentor might have divided loyalties. And that can tell us a lot about what's going on inside them emotionally and what their motivations really are. His choice to go to Drona first, it says a lot about his inner world at this make or break moment.
For sure. It's not just about getting information, it's a reflection of his psychology, his doubts, maybe even a calculated move to get Drona on his side before the fighting starts. And it makes us think about, who do we turn to when we're feeling uncertain? And what do those choices say about us?
Right, right. And the last big takeaway is the importance of being objective, like Sanjaya. His detached reporting lets us analyze everything without getting caught up in the emotional chaos of the battlefield.
Yeah, Sanjaya's role really highlights how powerful it can be to just step back and observe without getting emotionally invested. That kind of perspective can give us really important insights that people who are in the thick of it might miss. It's a good reminder that being objective is super valuable when you're trying to understand complicated situations.
So let's bring this home for everybody listening. Think about a time in your life when you were facing a challenge and the other side seemed really, really prepared. Like they had it all figured out. It could have been a big presentation at work, or maybe a really important negotiation, or even just a tough personal situation. Did you feel totally confident right away, or were you more like Duryodhana? Did you find yourself looking for reassurance or advice? Did the way your opponent presented themselves, like their army, so to speak, have an impact on how you felt?
This is where this ancient wisdom really becomes relevant to our lives today. The way Duryodhana reacts in this verse, it's a timeless example of how people behave when they're facing something difficult. It makes us think about how we typically respond to pressure and what strategies we use to deal with tough situations.
And it's just the beginning, right? It's a great starting point, but there's so much more to come. In the next verses, we're going to actually hear what Duryodhana says to Dronacharya. And those words are going to give us even more insight into what he's thinking and how this crucial conversation unfolds. And ultimately, it's this conversation that sets the stage for the whole Bhagavad Gita. So think about this. Based on what we've seen so far, this observation that Duryodhana makes and his decision to go to Drona, what questions do you have about leadership, about strategy, about inner strength? What do you think Duryodhana is going to say to his teacher in this super important meeting? It's a really interesting thing to consider as we move forward.
Definitely. This verse raises a ton of really fascinating questions about Duryodhana's motives and what's going to happen next. It encourages us to look beyond the surface of the story and think about the deeper psychological and strategic stuff that's going on. So what will Duryodhana's words to Drona reveal? That's the big question. And it sets the stage for this incredibly profound dialogue.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.